Hey guys, we are moving on to the second part of Khan Academy, which is making appropriate scatterplots. We originally had done constructing scatterplots, which the X and Y axes were labeled for us already, and they were already had numbers input for us. But if we were going to start constructing scatterplots from scratch, we would have to know how to make an appropriate scatterplot. So I'm going to go into this first section, and we're going to talk a little bit about what these graphs should look like and how we should build them. Okay. All right, so I'm going to read this first paragraph. It says Lynn wants to predict how much fuel her car will use based on its speed. She drove her car 100 kilometers at each of the speeds below, and she measured how much fuel was used at each speed. Her data is summarized in the table below. So we have a table here, and we have speed, and we have the fuel used. So all the scatter plots below display the data correctly, but which one of the displays the data the best? Okay, so I'm going to scroll down. They give you graph A, B, C, and D. So they're saying that all these show the data correctly, but we want to be able to pick the best one that shows the data kind of just appropriately. So what we've been looking at so far is associations and trends, and we want to be able to show that on the graph. So for example, for C and D, everything's kind of in one little area, and you're going to want to take up the whole graph. So right from the get-go, when you're doing these problems on Khan Academy, graphs that look like C and graphs that look like D are not the best way to show the data because you want to stretch it out. Now, you may see data like this in other questions, but for this particular Khan Academy section, you want to be able to show the whole data on the whole graph. Okay, so I'm going to eliminate C and D right off the bat because they're not taking up the whole graph. So I'm going to move to A and B. All right, so I'm going to look at what we kind of have to look at is the speed and the fuel used, and you kind of have to figure out. This does go deeper into like dependent and independent variables, but for the sake of what we've done so far and what we've seen, speed is usually on the x-axis. So some type of time is usually on the x-axis. So I'm going to choose graph A just based upon what we've seen and what we know. I think this graph and graph A would be the best way to show it. So the best way to handle these questions is to eliminate 2 right off the bat, which I'm going to show you the next question as well. So I'm going to eliminate graph C and D. So you're going to go down up to A and B, and you're going to figure out which ones they are. Just based on what we've seen, I'm going to go with A. Let's see if that's correct. Awesome. So I'm going to show you how, let's show you the next question. Okay, question 204. So Daniel wants to predict how much time a hike will take based on the distance of the hike. He collected some data on the time in hours and distance in kilometers of some of the previous hikes. So he gives you this table, he gives you the distance that he traveled, and then the time it took. So of all the scatter plots below, which one best displays the data? All right, so I'm going to go, and again, just like we saw in that first question, graph B and graph D are not taking up the whole table. So we're going to eliminate those right off the bat. Okay. So now in this instance here, we're working with distance and we're working with time. Now, in the first question, we usually put speed and we put time on the bottom. But for this instance, it's going to flip because of the way the relationship of the data works. Okay. So for these questions, you're going to want to eliminate 2 right off the bat, and then you're going to want to play around with your X and Y axis to kind of see what works best. So for graph C, I'm going to put in graph C. Let's check. All right. So there is a relationship between these 2 variables, and it starts to get a little confusing if I were to go into their real names because you don't really need to know all that detail. But what I'm going to ask you to do is to eliminate the 2 that don't take up the whole graph, and then see if you can figure out what is the best way to show the data. Okay, so for this answer, it was choice C. That's correct. So try to work your best on the next few questions. So like example, just without even reading the question, I'm already going to eliminate graph C and graph D. All right, so you're going to have to work to see if it's graph A or graph B. All right, so if you have any other questions, just let us know.